The silence in my living room has weight to it, like the air before a thunderstorm. I can hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the distant sound of traffic on Maple Street, even the soft tick of the clock on my bookshelf. But mostly, I hear my own heartbeat, loud and insistent in my ears, as I sit frozen on the edge of my couch cushion. Emery is looking at me, not the casual glance of someone waiting for me to pass the remote or laugh at a joke, but really looking at me. His dark eyes are steady and unblinking, and there's something in them I've never seen before. Something that makes my stomach clench with a mixture of terror and hope I've spent years learning to suppress. The words are still hanging in the air between us, as real and undeniable as the coffee table that separates us, as the half-empty beer bottles we'd been nursing during the basketball game that's now forgotten on my television screen. I've been curious about dating guys, and I thought maybe you could help me figure it out. He said it so simply, like he was asking me to help him move furniture or pick out a birthday gift for his sister. But his voice carried something else underneath the casual tone. A tremor. A vulnerability I'd only heard from him once before, the night his father died 3 years ago when he called me at 2 in the morning, sobbing into the phone. I should say something. I know that. The rational part of my brain, the part that's kept me safe and hidden for 28 years, is screaming at me to laugh it off, to make a joke, to suggest he download a dating app like everyone else does when they want to explore something new. But I can't move. I can't even blink. Because this is Emery. My Emery. The man who's been my closest friend since we were randomly assigned as roommates in college, who knows I take my coffee black and hate action movies and always order the same sandwich at our usual deli. The man who remembers my birthday every year and shows up at my apartment with terrible horror movies when I'm sick and calls me when he's drunk just to tell me he's grateful we're friends. The man I've been quietly, desperately in love with for nearly a decade. He's still wearing his work clothes. The navy polo shirt with the athletic center logo, khaki shorts that show off legs I've tried not to notice during our hiking trips. His brown hair is still slightly messy from his shift, and there's a small scar on his left temple from when he fell off his bike in 7th grade. I know these details the way I know the books on my shelves, the way I know the route from my apartment to the high school where I teach. I've memorized him without meaning to, collected pieces of him like souvenirs from a trip I never planned to take. And now he's sitting in my living room, 3 feet away, but somehow closer than he's ever been, asking me to help him figure out something I've been figuring out since I was 15. The dangerous thing is the hope. It's creeping up from somewhere deep in my chest, spreading through my ribs like warm honey, and I know I should stop it. I should remember all the nights I've lain awake imagining conversations exactly like this one, conversations that always ended with me broken and alone. I should remember that Emery has dated women for as long as I've known him. Sarah in college, who laughed too loud at his jokes. Rebecca, who worked at the bank and always wore red lipstick. Maria, the nurse he met at a bar last year and brought to trivia night exactly 3 times before it fizzled out. But the way he's looking at me now doesn't feel like the way he looked at any of them. There's something raw in his expression, something that makes my careful walls feel suddenly thin and fragile. I realize I've been holding my breath when my lungs start to burn. I force myself to exhale, to shift slightly on the couch, to remember that I'm a real person in a real moment and not just an observer in one of my own daydreams. What if this is real? The thought slips through my defenses before I can stop it. What if he's been questioning things the same way I did all those years ago, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if the way he feels about his male friends is the same way other guys feel? What if all those times I caught him watching me a little too long, or the way he always finds reasons to touch my shoulder or sit closer than necessary during movie nights? What if those moments meant something after all? But then the other voice, the one that's kept me safe for so long, whispers its familiar warnings. What if he's just curious? What if you're just convenient, the only gay man he trusts enough to ask? What if he experiments with you and then goes back to dating women, and you're left with the memory of what it felt like to have everything you wanted for just a moment before it disappeared? My hands are trembling slightly, so I press them against my thighs, hoping he doesn't notice. The basketball game plays on in the background, crowd noise and commentary that might as well be in another language. Nothing feels real except Emery's eyes on my face, waiting for an answer I don't know how to give. I think about the first time I realized I was different. 13 years old, watching Mark Sullivan score a goal during soccer practice, feeling something in my stomach that had nothing to do with friendship or admiration and everything to do with the way his hair fell across his forehead when he smiled. I think about the years of careful distance I learned to keep, the way I trained myself to look but never too long, to want but never ask, to love but never tell. And now Emery is asking me to be his guide into that same uncertain territory. The irony is almost laughable, except nothing about this moment feels funny. He shifts forward slightly, and I catch a hint of his cologne, the same woody scent he's worn since college. It's a smell I associate with safety and comfort, with late-night conversations and easy silences. But tonight it makes my head spin in a way that feels dangerous. "You could help me figure it out," he'd said. Figure it out. Like sexuality is a math problem or a recipe, something with clear steps and a definitive answer. But I know it's messier than that. I know it's about the way your heart speeds up when someone looks at you a certain way, the way your skin feels electric when they brush against you accidentally, the way you can spend years wanting something you're afraid to name. I look at him, really look at him, and see something I've been too scared to acknowledge before. The uncertainty in his expression isn't just about figuring out his sexuality. It's about me, about us, about what it might mean to cross this line we've been walking for years without either of us admitting it was there. My mouth is dry when I finally try to speak, and my voice comes out rougher than I intended. The word yes is sitting on my tongue, heavy and full of implications I'm not sure I'm ready for. But I also know that I could never say no to him. Not about this. Not when he's looking at me like I might be the answer to a question he's been afraid to ask. The clock on my bookshelf ticks once, twice, and the moment stretches between us like a bridge we're both afraid to cross. The word comes out quieter than I intended. Yes. It hangs in the air between us for a moment, and I watch something shift in Emery's expression. Relief, maybe, or fear, possibly both. I need to tell you about us first, about who we were before this moment changed everything. My name is Julian, and I've been teaching high school history for 6 years now. There's something comforting about the routine of it, the same classroom every day, the predictable rhythm of lesson plans, and grading papers late into the night with a cup of coffee growing cold at my elbow. I like the small consistencies, the way my students always sit in the same seats even though I never assign them, the way the morning light falls across my desk at exactly 8:15, the way Wednesday means trivia night at Murphy's Pub with Emery. I've built my life around these small, manageable pieces. Nothing too unpredictable. Nothing that might expose the careful distance I've learned to keep from wanting things I can't have. Emery is the opposite of careful. He's 27, an athletic trainer at the community center downtown, and he fills every room he enters like he was born to take up space. When he laughs, it's with his whole body. When he tells a story, his hands move like he's conducting an orchestra. When he walks into Murphy's every Wednesday night, the bartender automatically starts pouring his beer before he even reaches the bar. We met almost 10 years ago, freshman year at State, randomly assigned as roommates in Henderson Hall. I was the quiet kid from 2 hours north who'd never lived anywhere but his childhood bedroom. He was the charismatic athlete who knew everyone's name by the second week and somehow convinced me to come to parties I had no business attending. We shouldn't have worked as friends. I was the one who studied in the library until closing time. He was the one who organized flag football games on the quad and dated girls who wore sundresses to class even in October. But something clicked between us that first semester. Maybe it was the way he never made me feel strange for preferring books to bars, or the way I could make him laugh by pointing out the absurd historical parallels to whatever drama was unfolding in his social circle. By sophomore year, we'd moved into an off-campus apartment together. By junior year, we had traditions. Thursday night Chinese takeout. Saturday morning runs that I secretly hated but never skipped because I loved the way he'd buy me coffee afterward and listen to me complain about my cramping calves. Sunday evenings on the couch, him watching sports while I graded papers, both of us comfortable in the shared silence. After graduation, we stayed in town. He got his job at the community center. I started teaching at Roosevelt High. We found apartments 6 blocks apart and fell into new routines. Wednesday trivia, weekend hiking trips, Friday night movies at my place because I had the better television and he had the opinion that my couch was more comfortable than his. For 9 years, I've watched him date other people. Sarah, who lasted 8 months and cried when he broke up with her. Rebecca, who worked at First National and always ordered expensive wine when we all went out to dinner. Maria, the nurse with dark hair who was perfectly nice and perfectly wrong for him in ways I couldn't explain without revealing too much about myself. I've gotten good at being the friend. The one who listens when relationships don't work out. The one who gives advice about thoughtful gifts and helps him navigate the complicated emotions he never learned to articulate. The one who pretends it doesn't hurt when he brings dates to trivia night and I have to watch him be charming with someone else. But I've also learned to read the spaces between his words. The way he gets quiet sometimes when we're hiking, like he's thinking about something he can't quite name. The way he always sits closer than necessary during movie nights, his knee touching mine on the couch. The way he hugs me goodbye after trivia, holding on just a moment longer than friendship requires. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was seeing what I wanted to see because the alternative, that Emery might feel something similar, was too dangerous to consider. Hope, I learned a long time ago, is a luxury I can't afford when it comes to straight men who mean everything to me. But now he's sitting in my living room, asking me to help him figure something out, and all those careful walls I've built feel suddenly inadequate. The truth is, I've been in love with him since we were 20. Not the desperate, consuming kind of love that makes you do stupid things, but the quiet, steady kind that becomes part of who you are. Like breathing. Like the way I know he takes his coffee with 2 sugars and too much cream, or the way he always checks his phone twice before bed, or the way he unconsciously runs his hand through his hair when he's nervous. Like he's doing right now. I watch him drag his fingers through the brown waves, and my chest tightens with the familiar ache of wanting something I've never been allowed to want. But tonight feels different. Tonight, he's looking at me like I might be the answer to something instead of just the reliable friend who's always there when he needs me. Maybe this is what hope feels like when you finally let yourself acknowledge it. Terrifying and electric and completely outside the boundaries of the safe, predictable life I've built for myself. I realize he's waiting for me to say something more than just yes. He's waiting for me to say something more than just yes, and I can see the nervousness building in his expression. The confident Emery who commands every room he enters is nowhere to be found. Instead, there's this vulnerable version of him I've only glimpsed in fragments over the years. The night his father died. The morning after he failed his personal trainer certification exam the first time. The afternoon he called me from his car outside his ex-girlfriend Sarah's apartment because he couldn't bring himself to go inside and get his things. I need to know what this is, I tell him finally. What you're really asking. He shifts on the couch, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. It's the same position he takes when he's trying to solve a problem at work, when one of his clients isn't responding to treatment the way they should. Clinical, methodical, but his voice betrays him when he speaks. I don't know, he says, and there's something raw in those 3 words that makes my chest ache. I mean, I know what I'm asking, but I don't know what it means. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense, actually. More sense than I want it to. The conversation that follows happens slowly, like we're both testing the weight of each word before we say it. He tells me it started about 6 months ago, this restless feeling he couldn't name. Not dissatisfaction with his life, exactly, but a sense that something was missing, something he'd never let himself consider before. It wasn't like I woke up one day and thought I might be gay, he says, running that hand through his hair again. It was more like, you know when you're trying to remember a word, and it's right there on the tip of your tongue, but you can't quite grab it? It was like that, but with myself. I know exactly what he means. I remember being 17, sitting in my childhood bedroom, finally putting a name to the feeling I'd been carrying around like a secret weight since middle school. The relief of it. The terror. He tells me about the small moments that started adding up. The way he found himself noticing men in ways he'd never noticed them before. Not just their attractiveness. He'd always been able to acknowledge when another guy was good-looking, but something deeper. The way a man moved. The sound of laughter. The shape of hands. Then he tells me about the night 3 weeks ago when we were at trivia, and Marcus, the bartender with the sleeve of tattoos and the easy smile, was being particularly friendly. How he caught himself wondering what it would be like to be the kind of person Marcus flirted with instead of just the friend of the person Marcus flirted with. And then he tells me about last week, when we were hiking the trail up to Eagle Point, and I'd stopped to catch my breath near the overlook. How he'd watched me standing there with my hands on my hips, looking out over the valley, and felt something shift in his chest. Something that had nothing to do with friendship and everything to do with the way the late afternoon light caught in my hair. I think I've been lying to myself, he says quietly, about a lot of things. The admission hangs between us, and I realize I'm holding my breath again. This is the moment I've imagined in 1,000 different variations, but none of my fantasies prepared me for how complicated it would feel, how scared I would be, not just of being hurt, but of hurting him, because I know what comes next. The questions, the uncertainty, the messy process of figuring out who you are when everything you thought you knew about yourself suddenly feels negotiable. I remember my own journey through that territory, the months of confusion and self-doubt, the relationships that didn't work because I was still learning how to be honest about what I wanted. The difference is, I navigated all of that alone. Emery is asking me to be his guide. Why me? I ask, though I think I already know the answer. He looks at me like the question surprises him. Because I trust you, he says simply. Because you've never made me feel like I had to be anyone other than who I am. Because when I try to imagine figuring this out, you're the only person I can picture being honest with. Then he pauses, and something in his expression shifts. Becomes more vulnerable, if that's possible. And because, he says, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, when I think about what it might feel like to be with a man, I think about you. The words hit me like a physical force. 9 years of careful distance, of managed expectations, of telling myself that what I felt was one-sided and hopeless. All of it crumbles in an instant. But along with the hope comes a surge of panic. Because this isn't just about helping a friend anymore. This is about the possibility that everything I've wanted might actually be within reach, and that terrifies me more than any rejection ever could. What exactly are you asking me to do? I say, and I'm surprised by how steady my voice sounds. He takes a deep breath, like he's been preparing for this question. I don't know, he admits. Maybe we could. I don't know, practice? Go on dates, or something like that. Figure out what it feels like. Practice. The word sits strangely in the space between us. Clinical and safe, like the emotional equivalent of training wheels. But I can see the hope in his eyes, the fear, the desperate need for this to be something manageable and controlled. I want to tell him that love isn't something you practice. That attraction doesn't follow lesson plans. That the moment you start trying to figure out what it feels like to be with someone, you're already halfway to being with them for real. But I don't say any of that. Instead, I look at him, really look at him, and see the boy I fell in love with in college and the man he's become, asking me to help him discover something about himself that I've known about myself for over a decade. Okay, I tell him, we can try that. The first time we hold hands, it's 3 days later in Riverside Park, and it feels like the most natural and unnatural thing in the world. We're sitting on the bench near the duck pond, the same bench where we've sat dozens of times over the years, eating sandwiches from the deli, or just talking after particularly stressful days. But today is different. Today, we're here because Emery said he wanted to start with something simple, something that would help him get comfortable with intimacy between men. His words, comfortable with intimacy, like it's a skill he needs to develop rather than something that either exists or doesn't. I'm explaining the difference between physical attraction and romantic connection, trying to sound like the experienced guide he's asked me to be, when he reaches over and takes my hand. No warning, no asking permission, just his fingers sliding between mine like they belong there. My breath catches, and I stop talking mid-sentence. His hand is warm and slightly rough from the weightlifting calluses he's had since college. I know these hands. I've seen them gesture through 1,000 stories, hold beer bottles during trivia nights, steady me when I slipped on a hiking trail last spring. But I've never felt them like this, intentional and connected to mine. Sorry, he says quickly, starting to pull away. Is that weird? I just thought. Don't, I tell him, tightening my grip slightly. It's not weird. But it is weird, in the most wonderful and terrifying way possible. Because for 9 years, I've imagined what it would feel like to hold his hand, and now I know. It feels like coming home and jumping off a cliff at the same time. We sit there for maybe 10 minutes, not talking, just existing in this new space we've created. I watch an elderly couple feed the ducks near the water's edge, and I wonder if they can tell that something fundamental has shifted in the universe. If they can see that the quiet man and his friend on the bench are no longer just friends. When did you first know? Emery asks suddenly, his thumb tracing absently across my knuckles. The casual intimacy of the gesture makes my heart race. I tell him about Mark Sullivan and the soccer goal when I was 13, about the confusion and fear that followed, about the years of trying to convince myself I was just a late bloomer when it came to girls, that the right woman would eventually flip some switch inside me and make everything normal. Did you ever feel like something was wrong with you? He asks, and there's something vulnerable in his voice that makes me look at him instead of the ducks. For a long time, yeah? I tell him about the loneliness, about feeling like I was watching everyone else's life through glass, understanding the rules, but not being allowed to play the same game, about the weight of keeping secrets, even from myself. He listens without interrupting, his hand still holding mine, and when I finish talking, he's quiet for a long moment. I think I've been afraid of that feeling, he says finally, the wrongness. Like if I admit this about myself, everything else will have to change too. I understand what he means. Coming out doesn't just change how you see yourself, it changes how you move through the world. The casual assumptions people make, the way certain conversations include or exclude you, the realization that you've been performing a version of yourself that was never quite true. What else changes? He asks. I think about it carefully, because I want to be honest without scaring him. Some things change, I tell him. The way you think about your future, maybe. The way you understand your past. But the important things, who you are as a person, the people who really matter, those stay the same. He nods, processing this, and then asks the question I've been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. What was your first time like? With a guy, I mean. I tell him about David, my college roommate the semester after Emory and I stopped living together. How it happened almost by accident one night, when we were both drunk and lonely and tired of pretending we weren't attracted to each other. How awkward and wonderful and completely wrong it felt. Not because it was with a man, but because it was with the wrong man. It wasn't about love, I explain. It was about finally being honest about what I wanted, even if I didn't want it with him specifically. Emory absorbs this information with the same focus he brings to everything else, like he's filing it away for future reference. Then he asks about other relationships, about how I knew when I was really attracted to someone versus just curious, about whether the physical part feels different when there are emotions involved. I answer his questions as honestly as I can, but the whole time I'm hyper-aware of his hand in mine, of the way he's looking at me like I'm a book he's trying to read. The way his attention feels different now, more intense, more personal. Like he's not just learning about being with men in general, like he's learning about being with me. The conversation stretches on as the afternoon light shifts around us, and something begins to change between us. What started as a clinical discussion about sexuality becomes something more intimate. He tells me about the dreams he's been having lately, dreams that confuse and excite him in equal measure. I share stories I've never told anyone, moments from my own journey that I'd kept locked away. By the time we leave the park, something has shifted. We're still holding hands as we walk to our cars, and it no longer feels like an experiment. It feels like a choice we're both making, moment by moment. When we reach his car, he turns to face me, and there's something different in his expression, something that makes my pulse quicken. This doesn't feel like just figuring it out anymore, he says quietly. I know, I tell him, but I don't know what else to call it yet. He smiles then, the first completely unguarded smile I've seen from him since this whole thing started. Maybe we don't have to call it anything yet, he says. Maybe we can just see what happens. As I drive home, his words echo in my head, and I realize that somewhere between the park bench and this moment, we've crossed a line we can't uncross. We're not just practicing anymore. We're exploring something real, something that belongs to both of us. And for the first time in 9 years, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this story might have a different ending than the one I've been preparing myself for. The kiss happens 2 weeks later, on a Thursday night in my kitchen, and it changes everything. We've been doing this dance for 14 days now. Coffee dates where we sit closer than we used to, movie nights where his hand finds mine during the opening credits, walks through downtown where he loops his arm through mine like it's the most natural thing in the world. Each moment building on the last, each touch lasting a little longer, each conversation digging a little deeper beneath the surface of who we used to be. Tonight, I cooked dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta with the sauce he likes, a salad, the bottle of wine he brought that's been sitting on my counter since last weekend. We've eaten dinner together hundreds of times over the years, but tonight feels different. Tonight, he helped me chop vegetables and stood close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Tonight, when he handed me the olive oil, his fingers brushed mine and lingered there for a heartbeat longer than necessary. We're cleaning up afterward, moving around each other in the small space between my sink and refrigerator with the practiced ease of people who know each other's rhythms. He's drying the wine glasses while I rinse the plates, and we're talking about his work, about the new client who's recovering from a knee surgery and keeps pushing too hard too fast. You can't force healing, I tell him, handing him the last plate. It happens on its own timeline. He takes the plate from me, but instead of turning toward the cabinet, he stays where he is, close enough that I can see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. Is that what this is? He asks quietly. Healing. I don't know what this is, I tell him, which is the most honest thing I've said in weeks. That's when he sets the plate on the counter and steps closer. Not the casual closeness we've been practicing, but something intentional. Something that makes my breath catch in my throat. Julian, he says, and my name sounds different in his voice. Softer, more uncertain. I've been thinking about what you said. About your first time being with the wrong person. I can barely breathe. What about it? He reaches up and touches my face, his palm warm against my cheek. I don't want this to be with the wrong person, he says. Before I can ask what he means, before I can process the implications of what he's saying, he leans in and kisses me. It's hesitant at first, like he's asking a question with his mouth. Soft and careful and completely unlike the confident Emery I've known for 9 years. But then I kiss him back, and something shifts. His hand slides to the back of my neck, pulling me closer, and the kiss deepens into something that feels less like an experiment and more like an answer. When we finally break apart, we're breathing hard, and there's something in his eyes I've never seen before. Something that looks like wonder. That didn't feel like just figuring it out. He whispers against my forehead. Did it? No, I tell him, my voice rougher than I intended. It didn't. We stand there in my kitchen, foreheads touching, sharing the same air, and I can feel the weight of 9 years of unspoken feelings pressing against my chest. This is the moment I've imagined and dreaded in equal measure. The moment when everything I've been hiding threatens to spill out of me like water through a broken dam. I need to tell you something, I say, and he pulls back slightly to look at me. Okay, he says, but there's nervousness in his voice, like he's bracing himself for something that might hurt. The words feel impossible to say, but I know I can't keep carrying them alone. Not anymore. Not when he's standing in my kitchen looking at me like I might be something precious instead of just convenient. I've been in love with you, I tell him, the confession falling out of me in a rush. Not just attracted to you, not just curious about you. In love with you. For years. Since college, maybe. And I know this started as you trying to figure something out, but I can't keep pretending that it's just practice for me when it's never been just practice. He goes very still, his hand dropping from my neck to his side. For a moment, the only sound is the hum of my refrigerator and the distant traffic outside my window. Years? He asks finally, and I can't read his expression. I nod, unable to trust my voice. He stares at me for what feels like an eternity, and I prepare myself for the conversation I've been dreading. The one where he tells me he's sorry, that he didn't know, that this changes everything in ways that make it impossible to continue. The one where he walks out of my kitchen, and our friendship becomes another casualty of feelings that were never meant to be spoken aloud. But instead, he steps closer again. Why didn't you ever tell me? He asks, and there's something in his voice that doesn't sound like rejection. Because you weren't interested in men, I tell him. Because I didn't want to lose you. Because I thought it was better to have you as a friend than not have you at all. He reaches for my hands, holding them between us like an anchor. What if I had been interested? He asks quietly. What if I just didn't know how to be? The question hangs between us, heavy with possibilities I'm afraid to examine too closely. What are you saying? I ask. He takes a deep breath, like he's gathering courage for something that scares him. I'm saying that when I think about the future now, when I try to imagine what I want my life to look like, you're in every version of it. Not as my friend who's helping me figure things out. As the person I want to figure things out with. The words hit me like a revelation, like the last piece of a puzzle I didn't even know I'd been solving. I'm saying, he continues, his thumbs tracing circles on the backs of my hands, that maybe I've been curious about you specifically for longer than I was ready to admit. Even to myself. Standing there in my kitchen, Looking into his eyes, I realize that everything I thought I knew about this situation has been turned upside down. This isn't just about him discovering something new about himself. This is about both of us discovering something new about each other. Something that was always there, waiting for us to be brave enough to see it. The silence that follows his admission stretches between us like a held breath, and then something breaks. Not in a bad way. In the way that dams break when the pressure becomes too much to contain. He pulls me toward him and kisses me again, and this time there's nothing hesitant about it. This time, it's desperate and honest and full of 9 years of questions neither of us knew how to ask. We don't make it to the bedroom. We barely make it to the couch, stumbling through my living room with our hands tangled in each other's shirts, mouths finding necks and collarbones, and all the places that have been off limits until now. Everything happens fast and slow at the same time, urgent with want, but careful with the weight of what we're crossing over into. Afterward, we lie there in the lamplight from my kitchen, his head on my chest, both of us breathing like we've just run a marathon. My fingers trace absent patterns on his shoulder, and I can feel his heartbeat gradually slowing against my ribs. This is when the doubt creeps in. Not about what just happened, that felt more right than anything I've experienced in years, but about what comes next. About whether this moment is the beginning of something real, or just the inevitable conclusion of weeks of playing with fire. Are you okay? I ask, because he's been quiet for too long. He lifts his head to look at me, and there's something vulnerable in his expression that makes my chest tight. I think so, he says. I think I'm more okay than I've been in a long time. But also terrified. Of what? He sits up, running both hands through his hair, and I immediately miss the weight of him against me. Of this. Of what it means. Of screwing it up. I reach for his hand, threading our fingers together. You don't have to have it all figured out right now, I tell him. But he shakes his head. That's just it, Julian. I think I do. Because I can't keep doing this if it's just me trying to understand myself. Not when you just told me you've been in love with me for years. The words hit like a physical blow, even though I know he's right. I can't be his experiment anymore. I can't be the safe place he practices being with men, while he decides whether this is something he actually wants or just something he needed to try. What are you saying? I ask, though I'm afraid I already know. He looks at me with those brown eyes that have been breaking my heart in small ways for almost a decade. I'm saying I need to figure out if what I'm feeling is real or just gratitude or curiosity or some fucked up combination of both. The honesty of it cuts deep because I can see how much it costs him to say it. How much it costs both of us. He gets up and starts getting dressed, and I watch him pull on his shirt with movements that are too careful, too controlled. Like he's already building walls between us. I think I need some time, he says without looking at me, to think about this. About what I actually want. I nod because what else can I do? I can't argue with someone for needing space to understand their own feelings. I can't convince him to want me the way I want him. I learned that lesson years ago. How much time? I ask. I don't know. A few days? A week? However long it takes for me to be sure that if I choose this, I'm choosing it for the right reasons. After he leaves, I sit on my couch in the dark, still feeling the ghost of his weight against me, still tasting him on my lips. The rational part of my brain knows he's being smart, responsible, the kind of thoughtful person I fell in love with in the first place. But the rest of me feels like I'm being torn apart. Because this is the thing about hope. Once you let it in, once you allow yourself to believe that the thing you've wanted most might actually be possible, losing it feels like losing everything. 3 days pass, then 4, then a week. I go to work and teach my classes about the French Revolution and the causes of World War I, and I grade papers late into the night with coffee growing cold at my elbow. I maintain the routines that have always kept me grounded, but everything feels hollow now. Like I'm performing the actions of my life without actually living it. He doesn't call. He doesn't text. He doesn't show up for trivia night on Wednesday. And Marcus the bartender asks where he is with the kind of casual interest that makes me realize how obvious we must have been, even before we were anything at all. I make excuses. Family obligation. Work thing. Sick. Each lie gets easier to tell, even as the truth gets harder to carry. On Friday night, I'm grading midterm exams when I hear footsteps on my front porch. Heavy, familiar footsteps that make my heart rate spike before I even look through the peephole. He's standing on my doorstep in the rain, soaked through and shivering, looking like he's been walking for miles. His hair is plastered to his forehead, and there's something wild in his eyes that I've never seen before. I open the door without a word, and he steps inside, dripping water on my hardwood floor. "I can't stop thinking about you," he says, his voice rough and breathless. "I've tried. I've spent a week trying to convince myself that what I felt was just curiosity or confusion or some kind of quarter-life crisis, but I can't. I can't stop thinking about the way you look at me, the way you've always looked at me, like I'm something worth seeing." He takes a step closer, and I can see that he's trembling, though whether from cold or emotion, I can't tell. "I don't know where this goes," he says. "I don't know what it means for who I am or what people will think or how to navigate any of this. But I know I want you there. I know that when I imagine my future now, the only version that makes sense is the one where you're in it. Not as my friend who helped me figure things out, but as the person I figured it out for." Standing there in my entryway, looking at him rain-soaked and vulnerable and completely honest, I realize that sometimes the scariest thing isn't the possibility of getting hurt. Sometimes it's the possibility of getting everything you've ever wanted. "I don't know where this goes either," I tell him, "but I want to find out. With you." 2 months later, we're on the rooftop of his apartment building at midnight, the city spreading out below us like a constellation of possibilities. It's become our place, this rooftop. Not because we planned it that way, but because sometimes you need somewhere to go when the conversations get too big for regular rooms. Somewhere with enough sky to hold all the questions you're still learning how to ask. Tonight, we climbed up here after dinner because Emery's sister called to tell him she's getting married in the spring, and she wants to know if he's bringing anyone. It's the kind of question that used to be simple, a casual yes or no, a name he could drop without explanation. Now it feels loaded with implications neither of us is quite ready to navigate. We haven't talked about labels yet. We haven't talked about what we are to each other beyond two people who are figuring something out together. Some days that feels like enough. Some days it feels like the most honest thing either of us has ever done, existing in the space between friendship and something more, taking it one conversation at a time. But other days, like tonight, the uncertainty sits heavier. Not because either of us doubts what we feel, but because the world outside of us requires definitions we're not sure how to provide. He's lying on his back on the old blanket we keep up here, hands behind his head, staring up at the October sky. I'm sitting beside him, legs crossed, watching the way his breath fogs slightly in the cool air. "What did you tell her?" I ask. "That I'd let her know," he says. "That it's complicated." I smile despite the weight of the conversation. "It is complicated, isn't it?" He turns his head to look at me, and even in the dim light from the city below, I can see something soft in his expression. The good kind of complicated, though. He's right. This thing between us, whatever we're calling it, has been the opposite of simple. There have been moments of doubt, nights when one of us retreated into old patterns of thinking, afternoons when the magnitude of what we're building together felt too overwhelming to hold. But there have also been mornings when I wake up to texts from him that make me smile before I'm even fully conscious. Evenings when he shows up at my apartment with takeout and stays until we fall asleep on my couch during whatever movie we weren't really watching anyway. Quiet Sunday afternoons when we go hiking and he reaches for my hand without thinking, like it's the most natural thing in the world. 3 weeks ago, he came to parent-teacher conferences at my school because I was nervous about a particularly difficult conversation with a student's family. He sat in the hallway outside my classroom for 2 hours, grading his own paperwork, just because he knew I'd feel better knowing he was there. When I asked him why, he said it was what you do for people you care about. People you care about. Not people you're dating. Not boyfriends. Just people you care about, which somehow feels both more and less than either of those other things. "I think about telling my sister," he says suddenly, breaking into my thoughts. "Yeah? What would you say?" He sits up, pulling his knees to his chest, mirroring my position. "I don't know. That I'm seeing someone. That it's serious, even though we've never used that word. That he's the first person who's ever made me understand what people mean when they talk about wanting to build a life with someone." My heart does something complicated in my chest. "Is that what you want?" I ask quietly. "To build a life with someone?" He looks at me like the answer should be obvious. "With you, yeah? If you want that too." The simplicity of it catches me off guard. After months of navigating the complexity of labels and expectations and what other people might think, he's reduced it to the only question that actually matters. Do we want to do this together? I do. I tell him, and the words feel like a promise. He smiles then, the kind of smile I've been seeing more of lately. Unguarded and complete, like he's not holding any part of himself back. Come here, he says, reaching for me. I scoot closer until I'm pressed against his side, his arm around my shoulders, both of us looking out over the city that's been the backdrop to this entire strange and wonderful transformation. You know what's funny? He says, his voice quiet against my hair. What? I spent so much time worrying about what it would mean to be with a man. What it would say about me, what would change, how I'd have to see myself differently. But being with you doesn't feel like becoming someone new. It feels like finally being who I actually am. I close my eyes and let myself sink into the warmth of him, into the weight of what he's saying. Because I know exactly what he means. For years, I carried my feelings for him like a secret that made me different, separate, something other than what I appeared to be. Now, sitting here with his arm around me, I feel more like myself than I ever have. So what are we? I ask, though I'm not sure I need the answer anymore. He's quiet for a moment, thinking it over with the same careful consideration he brings to everything that matters to him. We're us, he says finally. We're Julian and Emery, and we're figuring it out as we go, and we're doing it together. It's not the answer I would have expected 6 months ago, when I was still convinced that love required certainty and relationships needed clear definitions to survive. But it's the answer that makes sense now, sitting on this rooftop with the person who's taught me that sometimes the most important things can't be labeled or categorized or explained to anyone else. Sometimes they can just be lived. His hand finds mine in the space between us, fingers interlacing with the practiced ease of something we've done 100 times before. But tonight it feels different. Tonight it feels like a choice we're both making, not just for this moment, but for all the moments to come. We sit there in comfortable silence, watching the city breathe around us, and I think about how strange it is that the thing I wanted most turned out to be even better than I imagined. Not because it's simpler or easier or more certain than I expected, but because it's real in ways I never knew to hope for. We're us, and we're figuring it out together, and for now, that's everything.